Chapter 26. On August 25, the eve of the Battle of Borodino, M. de Busset, prefect of the French Emperor's palace, arrived at Napoleon's quarters at Valluevo with Colonel Fabvier, the former from Paris and the latter from Madrid. Donning his court uniform, M. de Busset ordered a box he had brought for the Emperor to be carried before him and entered the first compartment of Napoleon's tent, where he began opening the box while conversing with Napoleon's aides-de-camp who surrounded him. Fabvier, not entering the tent, remained at the entrance talking to some generals of his acquaintance. The Emperor Napoleon had not yet left his bedroom and was finishing his toilet. Slightly snorting and grunting, he presented now his back and now his plump hairy chest to the brush with which his valet was rubbing him down. Another valet, with his finger over the mouth of a bottle, was sprinkling eau de cologne on the Emperor's pampered body with an expression which seemed to say that he alone knew where and how much eau de cologne should be sprinkled. Napoleon's short hair was wet and matted on the forehead, but his face, though puffy and yellow, expressed physical satisfaction. "Go on, harder, go on," he muttered to the valet who was rubbing him, slightly twitching and grunting. An aide-de-camp, who had entered the bedroom to report to the Emperor the number of prisoners taken in yesterday's action, was standing by the door after delivering his message, awaiting permission to withdraw. Napoleon, frowning, looked at him from under his brows. "No prisoners," said he, repeating the aide-de-camp's words. "They are forcing us to exterminate them. So much the worse for the Russian army." "Go on, harder, harder," he muttered, hunching his back and presenting his fat shoulders. "All right. Let Monsieur de Busset enter, and Fabvier too," he said, nodding to the aide-de-camp. "Yes, sire," and the aide-de-camp disappeared through the door of the tent. Two valets rapidly dressed His Majesty, and wearing the blue uniform of the guards he went with firm quick steps to the reception room. De Busset's hands meanwhile were busily engaged arranging the present he had brought from the Empress, on two chairs directly in front of the entrance. But Napoleon had dressed and come out with such unexpected rapidity that he had not time to finish arranging the surprise. Napoleon noticed at once what they were about and guessed that they were not ready. He did not wish to deprive them of the pleasure of giving him a surprise, so he pretended not to see de Busset and called Fabvier to him, listening silently and with a stern frown to what Fabvier told him of the heroism and devotion of his troops fighting at Salamanca, at the other end of Europe, with but one thought, to be worthy of their emperor, and but one fear, to fail to please him. The result of that battle had been deplorable. Napoleon made ironic remarks during Fabvier's account, as if he had not expected that matters could go otherwise in his absence. "I must make up for that in Moscow," said Napoleon. "I'll see you later," he added, and summoned de Busset, who by that time had prepared the surprise, having placed something on the chairs and covered it with a cloth. De Busset bowed low, with that courtly French bow which only the old retainers of the Bourbons knew how to make, and approached him, presenting an envelope. Napoleon turned to him gaily and pulled his ear. "You have hurried here. I am very glad. Well, what is Paris saying?" he asked, suddenly changing his former stern expression for a most cordial tone. "Sire, all Paris regrets your absence," replied de Busset as was proper. But though Napoleon knew that de Busset had to say something of this kind, and though in his lucid moments he knew it was untrue, he was pleased to hear it from him. Again he honored him by touching his ear. "I am very sorry to have made you travel so far," said he. "Sire, I expected nothing less than to find you at the gates of Moscow," replied de Busset. Napoleon smiled and, lifting his head absent-mindedly, glanced to the right. An aide-de-camp approached with gliding steps and offered him a gold snuff-box, which he took. "Yes, it has happened luckily for you," he said, raising the open snuff-box to his nose. "You are fond of travel, and in 3 days you will see Moscow. You surely did not expect to see that Asiatic capital. You will have a pleasant journey." De Busset bowed gratefully at this regard for his taste for travel, of which he had not till then been aware. "Ha, what's this?" asked Napoleon, noticing that all the courtiers were looking at something concealed under a cloth. With courtly adroitness de Busset half turned and without turning his back to the Emperor retired 2 steps, twitching off the cloth at the same time, and said, "A present to your Majesty from the Empress." It was a portrait, painted in bright colors by Gerard, of the son born to Napoleon by the daughter of the Emperor of Austria, the boy whom for some reason everyone called the King of Rome. A very pretty curly-headed boy with a look of the Christ in the Sistine Madonna was depicted playing at stick and ball. The ball represented the terrestrial globe and the stick in his other hand a scepter. Though it was not clear what the artist meant to express by depicting the so-called King of Rome spiking the earth with a stick, the allegory apparently seemed to Napoleon, as it had done to all who had seen it in Paris, quite clear and very pleasing. "The King of Rome," he said, pointing to the portrait with a graceful gesture. "Admirable." With the natural capacity of an Italian for changing the expression of his face at will, he drew nearer to the portrait and assumed a look of pensive tenderness. He felt that what he now said and did would be historical, and it seemed to him that it would now be best for him, whose grandeur enabled his son to play stick and ball with the terrestrial globe, to show, in contrast to that grandeur, the simplest paternal tenderness. His eyes grew dim, he moved forward, glanced round at a chair, which seemed to place itself under him, and sat down on it before the portrait. At a single gesture from him everyone went out on tiptoe, leaving the great man to himself and his emotion. Having sat still for a while he touched, himself not knowing why, the thick spot of paint representing the highest light in the portrait, rose, and recalled Dubuisset and the officer on duty. He ordered the portrait to be carried outside his tent, that the old guard, stationed round it, might not be deprived of the pleasure of seeing the King of Rome, the son and heir of their adored monarch. And while he was doing Dubuisset the honor of breakfasting with him, they heard, as Napoleon had anticipated, the rapturous cries of the officers and men of the old guard who had run up to see the portrait. "Vive l'Empereur! Vive le Roi de Rome! Vive l'Empereur!" came those ecstatic cries. After breakfast Napoleon in Dubuisset's presence dictated his order of the day to the army. Short and energetic, he remarked when he had read over the proclamation which he had dictated straight off without corrections. It ran: "Soldiers! This is the battle you have so longed for. Victory depends on you. It is essential for us, it will give us all we need, comfortable quarters and a speedy return to our country. Behave as you did at Austerlitz, Friedland, Vitebsk, and Smolensk. Let our remotest posterity recall your achievements this day with pride. Let it be said of each of you, he was in the great battle before Moscow." "Before Moscow," repeated Napoleon, and inviting Dubuisset, who was so fond of travel, to accompany him on his ride, he went out of the tent to where the horses stood saddled. "Your Majesty is too kind," replied Dubuisset to the invitation to accompany the Emperor. He wanted to sleep, did not know how to ride and was afraid of doing so. But Napoleon nodded to the traveler, and Dubuisset had to mount. When Napoleon came out of the tent the shouting of the guards before his son's portrait grew still louder. Napoleon frowned. "Take him away," he said, pointing with a gracefully majestic gesture to the portrait. "It is too soon for him to see a field of battle." Dubuisset closed his eyes, bowed his head, and sighed deeply, to indicate how profoundly he valued and comprehended the Emperor's words. Chapter 27. On the 25th of August, so his historians tell us, Napoleon spent the whole day on horseback inspecting the locality, considering plans submitted to him by his marshals, and personally giving commands to his generals. The original line of the Russian forces along the river Kolocha had been dislocated by the capture of the Shevardino redoubt on the 24th, and part of the line, the left flank, had been drawn back. That part of the line was not entrenched and in front of it the ground was more open and level than elsewhere. It was evident to anyone, military or not, that it was here the French should attack. It would seem that not much consideration was needed to reach this conclusion, nor any particular care or trouble on the part of the Emperor and his marshals, nor was there any need of that special and supreme quality called genius that people are so apt to ascribe to Napoleon, yet the historians who described the event later and the men who then surrounded Napoleon, and he himself, thought otherwise. Napoleon rode over the plain and surveyed the locality with a profound air and in silence, nodded with approval or shook his head dubiously, and without communicating to the generals around him the profound course of ideas which guided his decisions merely gave them his final conclusions in the form of commands. Having listened to a suggestion from Davout, who was now called Prince d'Eckmühl, to turn the Russian left wing. Napoleon said it should not be done, without explaining why not. To a proposal made by General Campan, who was to attack the flèches, to lead his division through the woods, Napoleon agreed, though the so-called Duke of Elchingen, Ney, ventured to remark that a movement through the woods was dangerous and might disorder the division. Having inspected the country opposite the Shevárdino redoubt, Napoleon pondered a little in silence and then indicated the spots where 2 batteries should be set up by the Moro to act against the Russian entrenchments, and the places where, in line with them, the field artillery should be placed. After giving these and other commands he returned to his tent, and the dispositions for the battle were written down from his dictation. These dispositions, of which the French historians write with enthusiasm and other historians with profound respect, were as follows. At dawn the 2 new batteries established during the night on the plain occupied by the Prince d'Eckmühl will open fire on the opposing batteries of the enemy. At the same time the commander of the artillery of the First Corps, General Pernetti, with 30 cannon of Campan's division and all the howitzers of Desaix's and Friant's divisions, will move forward, open fire, and overwhelm with shellfire the enemy's battery, against which will operate 24 guns of the artillery of the Guards, 30 guns of Campan's division, and 8 guns of Friant's and Desaix's divisions. In all 62 guns. The commander of the artillery of the Third Corps, General Fouché, will place the howitzers of the 3rd and 8th Corps, 16 in all, on the flanks of the battery that is to bombard the entrenchment on the left, which will have 40 guns in all directed against it. General Sorbier must be ready at the first order to advance with all the howitzers of the Guards' artillery against either one or other of the entrenchments. During the cannonade Prince Poniatowski is to advance through the wood on the village and turn the enemy's position. General Campan will move through the wood to seize the first fortification. After the advance has begun in this manner, orders will be given in accordance with the enemy's movements. The cannonade on the left flank will begin as soon as the guns of the right wing are heard. The sharpshooters of Morin's division and of the Vice-King's division will open a heavy fire on seeing the attack commence on the right wing. The Vice-King will occupy the village and cross by its 3 bridges, advancing to the same heights as Morin's and Gibrard's divisions, which under his leadership will be directed against the redoubt and come into line with the rest of the forces. All this must be done in good order, le tout se fera avec ordre et method, as far as possible retaining troops in reserve. The Imperial Camp near Mazhaisk. September 6, 1812. These dispositions, which are very obscure and confused if one allows oneself to regard the arrangements without religious awe of his genius, related to Napoleon's orders to deal with 4 points, 4 different orders. Not one of these was, or could be, carried out. In the disposition it is said first that the batteries placed on the spot chosen by Napoleon, with the guns of Pernetti and Fouché, which were to come in line with them, 102 guns in all, were to open fire and shower shells on the Russian flèches and redoubts. This could not be done, as from the spot selected by Napoleon the projectiles did not carry to the Russian works, and those 102 guns shot into the air until the nearest commander, contrary to Napoleon's instructions, moved them forward. The second order was that Poniatowski, moving to the village through the wood, should turn the Russian left flank. This could not be done and was not done, because Poniatowski, advancing on the village through the wood, met Tuchkov there barring his way, and could not and did not turn the Russian position. The third order was, General Campan will move through the wood to seize the first fortification. General Campan's division did not seize the first fortification but was driven back, for on emerging from the wood it had to reform under grapeshot, of which Napoleon was unaware. The fourth order was, the Vice-King will occupy the village, Borodino, and cross by its 3 bridges, advancing to the same heights as Morin's and Girard's divisions, for whose movements no directions are given, which under his leadership will be directed against the redoubt and come into line with the rest of the forces. As far as one can make out, not so much from this unintelligible sentence as from the attempts the Vice-King made to execute the orders given him, he was to advance from the left through Borodino to the redoubt while the divisions of Morin and Girard were to advance simultaneously from the front. All this, like the other parts of the disposition, was not and could not be executed. After passing through Borodino the Vice-King was driven back to the Kolocha and could get no farther, while the divisions of Morin and Girard did not take the redoubt but were driven back, and the redoubt was only taken at the end of the battle by the cavalry, a thing probably unforeseen and not heard of by Napoleon. So not one of the orders in the disposition was, or could be, executed. But in the disposition it is said that, after the fight has commenced in this manner, orders will be given in accordance with the enemy's movements, and so it might be supposed that all necessary arrangements would be made by Napoleon during the battle. But this was not and could not be done, for during the whole battle Napoleon was so far away that, as appeared later, he could not know the course of the battle and not one of his orders during the fight could be executed.